if you do automation right, it really can have an impact on employee satisfaction and reduction of burnout.
Hi, I'm Alex Henson, and welcome to Legends of Employee Experience. Throughout this series, I am talking to leaders from the business and technology world that are shaping employee experience at their organizations. Today, I'm joined by Jim Noga. Jim is the VP and Chief Information Officer at Mass General Brigham over in Massachusetts. Mass General Brigham is the largest private employer in Massachusetts, with 80,000 employees and serving numerous patients throughout the East Coast. Jim, welcome to the show.
Well, thank you for inviting me, and I'll look forward to our conversation.
Yeah, me too. And one of the reasons I've been really looking forward to this conversation is because, if you don't mind me sharing the news, Jim, you're actually retiring very soon.
Correct, end of May. I am officially retiring after 41 years in healthcare IT.
Well, congrats on an amazing career throughout your 41 years, and in particular at Mass General Brigham. And so normally when I get people on the show, everyone has careers to think of. They have to be very professional and keep their thoughts in a particular tone. Of course, you're retiring, so you can say pretty much whatever you like. So I would love to start by thinking about employee experience. This is a huge topic throughout the world. And employee burnout is, of course, one of the things we hear about all of the time. And in fact, just this morning, I was reading a survey. There were many of these surveys going around. I was looking at this one by Deloitte. Stats like 77% of respondents experiencing employee burnout in their current job, 91% of people saying they have unmanageable workload. So I'm particularly interested to get your thoughts on employee burnout in an organization that has physicians, healthcare workers, educational institutions. Help me understand your approach to thinking about employee burnout, and in particular, the role of technology in helping it.
First, if we start with our healthcare providers, the pandemic was especially difficult for them. And you'll read in many newspapers, that nurses are leaving the profession, that the pandemic has just put so much stress on them. So through automation, electronic records, we try to take away the administrative task that can help as much as possible for those people. So I think that's one aspect of employee burnout in healthcare. The other is, all the knowledge workers, including IT workers, they have Teams or Zoom fatigue. And they're feeling burned out. So how are you able to engage them through technology, through collaboration software, through being able to automate tasks, whether it's remote process automation, whether it's chatbots, whether it's more easily to engage with human resources that helps them focus on what they need to focus on and not the administrivia. I mean, you're going to hear a theme, of reduction of administrivia to employees is extremely important. Whether it's calling the IT service desk, whether it's interacting with HR, whether it's putting in a request for the toilet's broken, although they're not here, so they don't put in those requests anymore. They're rarely here. We still have the majority of people that are working remotely. So I think it's allowing people to focus on what they believe they've been hired for and not for all those other things that sometimes we ask them to do that they really don't feel are core to their job. Also, I think the isolation in the pandemic has caused a good deal of burnout. And so how can you reduce that isolation factor? And that's where you really do get into more of what I would call collaboration software, whether it's Teams, whether it's Slack, whatever the tool, and how as a leader do you assure that you're checking in with employees and checking not just are they being productive, but are they feeling engaged and part of the culture is extremely important in reducing employee burnout.
So we can talk more about collaboration. Unsurprisingly, that's a hot topic with guests that come on this show. I want to dig a little bit more into automation, because automation is not a new term. Automation has been around for a long time. When you think back through your career, what's changed in the world of automation that now makes it possible to create a great employee experience? How do you connect the dots between something that seems kind of back office and efficiency related from an operational perspective? How do you use automation in a way that makes employees enjoy their jobs more?
Good question, because you're right. Automation was introduced to increase efficiency. So it was very transaction oriented. And I think the shift over time has been now automation is used to support end-to-end processes. That's a very different concept than just automating a particular transaction. And employees come in and out of those processes. But if you do automation right, it really can have an impact on employee satisfaction and reduction of burnout. Because I think what we all don't like to do is constantly have to have asynchronous communication with individuals to find out what's the status of something in the process. You want that to be automated and come at you. So people do talk about the Amazon experience. It might be overused, but it's a pretty good experience in terms of really knowing where things are at all times. I don't think we've achieved that yet in the work environment. Whether it's an interaction with HR, although we've introduced some automation in HR and Ask My HR website, but that we need to take up several notches because employees get really frustrated interacting with HR sometimes for a simple request, and then they end up having to ping somebody in HR over and over. Sometimes it's just knowing the status of something that is extremely important. I talked about robotic process automation, and we have automated some jobs, and those people, it doesn't necessarily mean staff reduction, there's enough work, but it means I can do something more interesting now than scraping, Massachusetts government websites for licensure on our physicians in terms of a status. So I think it's really, really to focus on what are the pain points for employees. And often they're some of the same pain points that they have in the external work environment in terms of, my car's in the shop. When will it be ready? What's it going to cost me? The same thing I think goes on in the work environment. What are my benefits? What are going to be my copay if I go see a physician? All those things are important to really be automated. So I'm going to extend beyond our employees with our patients, and having a patient portal has been of great value, where patients can now interact, really know what's going on. I went to a physician visit, I think it was on Thursday morning. By noon, I was able to read the physician's visit note and recommendations. In the previous model, that would be days, if not weeks, before you really knew. So I think a lot of it is getting things back to people quickly in terms of the status of a particular request or where a process is. In fact, I think when you look at automation, what's really important is people will build like a 5-year plan and they focus on the really big things. I always think you need to have a holdback on resources that deal with what I call the irritants. You can bundle those irritants. You can find 20 irritants and really focus on those. And those sometimes move the needle in terms of whether it's employee satisfaction or employee engagement more than the big things. So you have to have some slack in your system to deal with those irritants. Because sometimes you'll have IT leaders and they'll say, yeah, that's a 5-hour thing, but we really don't have time for that now. But it's really big to the people on the other end.
I think the being a patient might actually be quite a good analogy. So, when I think about the reason I go to a doctor or a hospital, it's because there's something wrong. I have an ailment or something's not working in my body the way it normally should be, but I'm not an expert, right? So I see the symptom. I might not know the cause and I might not know what the solution is. I think that's sometimes the struggle for employees in the workplace is oftentimes it feels kind of similar. I know there's something wrong, or I don't have the information I need, or I need some action taking. I don't really know if it's an IT issue, or is it HR, or is it finance, or is it something else? How do you fix that?
Yeah, I fully agree. I think first you have to identify those pain points. So I've been talking to HR because I've said, you know what, retiring actually isn't easy. You have to think about health insurance. Am I going to do COBRA? I'm old enough. Am I going to do Medicare A and B and Part D? How do I sign up for that? If I have deferred compensation, what are my options on that? That can be a painful process, and it shouldn't be painful. That information is there once you get to the right person. That why can't that be automated and be a much smoother experience? So that's where I think the opportunity is with employees. And I think mostly companies focused on efficiency and they focused on the consumer. They did not focus necessarily on the employee. Yes, they did employee surveys in terms of employee satisfaction, but really starting to direct a focused effort to automate those things. Whether it's a simple thing, for us it was really big here when we went from paper evaluation forms that we had to scan in and send on an email to HR to actually a automated evaluation process that's automatically submitted to HR and immediate confirmation to the employee. And it sounds simple, but it was a massive employee satisfier as well as management satisfier to automate that simple process. Now, whether you really should be doing evaluations, that's for people after I retire to determine. I have some thoughts on that I think you're better off having a continuous evaluation process than this once a year cloud of dust of 3 days of work and a half-hour discussion and then set it aside until the next year. But that's a personal opinion.
And so when you think about the changes in approach to employee experience, obviously the last couple of years have necessitated an increased focus on thinking about employees and how they work, and obviously, of course, in a hybrid world. So for you being at a healthcare institution, I imagine there's some nuance to what work people can do in remote locations, what work needs to be done in person. So going back to something you touched on earlier, collaboration, connectivity, giving people the tools they need to do their job. What are some of the unique considerations for you at Mass General Brigham and other healthcare institutions?
So a lot of the knowledge workers are able to work remotely. And so you outfit them with the appropriate equipment and technology. Many of the care providers, they really don't have a remote option. They have to be there for the patients walking through the door in an ambulatory setting or into an ED or inpatient setting. Even within IT, our desktop techs can't work remotely. They can fix some things in that through remote control, but often they need to visit the site, whether it be on a care unit, whether it be in the emergency department, or whether it be in a clinic. So I think there was a perception that there was disparity, that a lot of people are getting to work from home all the time, but I have to come into work. And so we paid special attention to those people to make sure they understood that they were valued and why they needed to be on site. But those were really separate, where possibly a place like Moveworks, it's a very small percentage that actually need to be on site compared to healthcare.
So what's the detail behind that? How do you pay special attention to different cohorts or different types of people in different roles, and make them understand and feel valued?
Well, I think from a leadership perspective, it does require that leaders come on site and meet with those people and talk to those people and understand where their pain points are being on site. And simple things like, can they get affordable parking? Like, because a big thing was, geez, I have to come in, I have to pay my commute cost, I have to pay for parking. Not that you can necessarily waive all that, but you can help explain it. And I think we're going to find that, on a go-forward basis, people are going to have to make a decision as to whether they're comfortable working for a company, not just Mass General Brigham, that requires them to be on site. And you're reading more and more in Wall Street Journal and other places that companies are calling employees back, and a lot of them aren't too happy about that. Suddenly, you're burning another 2 to 3 hours on a commute, and now with gasoline prices, you're paying heftily for that commute. And my daughter works in Boston, and she says, man, I forgot what lunch costs when you're in Boston if you don't bring it. You spend an hour of your paycheck on your lunch and breakfast. So people view that as disparities in compensation. So you just have to work with them and recognize it and talk about it. My big philosophy in leadership is you have to show respect for the individual. And whether it's the person that's emptying your trash can or whether it's the CEO. And I think that's one of the keys to leadership, and that you're consistent with that respect across all hierarchies in the organization. As people see that in leaders, they pick it off. They pick off a person that treats a senior executive better than they treat a middle manager. And so, I have certain things as I was retiring. When I did reviews this year, I offered, people advice, and I said, never attack a person in a hierarchy that's at a lower level than you. Talk to their manager. Don't go after them personally, and do it civilly. Being able to have fun, I think, is important. And through the pandemic, I think some of that was people tried to play games virtually. They tried to have social hours. It sort of worked and it sort of didn't work. And I really think what happened is not that individuals became isolated, but teams became isolated, and organizations within a organization became isolated. So, you didn't run into the finance department in the cafeteria. Those random collisions just don't happen in the virtual environment. And I don't think that one's been solved yet in terms of how you try to recreate that, because those were actually pretty important in terms of cutting down on meeting requests. Although, the other thing we've seen in the virtual environment, and I don't know whether you've experienced that, meetings are rarely an hour now. People have compressed them to a half an hour, but it doesn't mean your calendar is less full. It's just now you have 10 meetings a day instead of 6 or 7.
I would say I've absolutely seen that. I think in the early days of the pandemic, my calendar started to resemble something like a Tetris board of tiny little 30-minute meetings, and it took a while, I think, to learn how to operate. Another theme that has come out in these conversations, and something that you touched on, is the need for more deliberate communication when you're talking to individuals or talking to teams. And I think when we were in the office, as you talked about, we had these natural interactions. You'd get a sense for how people thought about you, your performance, your engagement with other people. And I think a lot of that disappeared in many ways. And so what a lot of people have been thinking about is creating more deliberate methods of communication, recognition, engagement. How have you experienced that with your own team?
So I'll be a bit of a contrarian and say I've met more people working remotely than I did in person. Now, maybe that's because We deliberately had coffee and conversations. We deliberately had monthly all IS staff meeting. We deliberately had managers meetings. And the thing about the virtual environment, when we had some of those in person, people had other things to do, or there was, what I call geographic dislocation. So maybe you got 60% of the managers to show up at a management meeting. In the virtual environment, we were well over 90, closer to 95% in terms of attendance. So that's within the department. Again, where I think there was less interaction is with people in other departments, whether that's HR, finance, etc. But you have to be deliberate about it. Whether it's a coffee and conversation, whether it's a brown bag lunch. So we started to do sessions with our tech leaders that we realized a lot of us actually taught at local universities, but we never shared that knowledge with our own staff. So doing things that aren't necessarily part of the day-to-day job that allow people to interact with leadership are important. And every Friday, I'm not doing it right now, I wrote a message to the entire department. And it wasn't a status report. It was more personal in nature in terms of, I think one Friday I wrote one about a dog's view of the pandemic. And it went on about what do dogs think about this? Hey, my owners are always home. This is really great. And this and went on. And it was like just something to break it up, that people feel connected in a personal way. Or another Friday message, I did a takeoff on the novel A Tale of Two Cities. And the fact that we may all feel we're moving towards the same destination, but our journey could be very different because people had different challenges at home. Some people, their home environment really did not avail itself to being a remote, whether it's they had 4 kids in school, it's a smaller home versus the person that maybe lives alone or with a partner and has a dedicated office. That's very different. And just a recognition that, we're all on this journey, but it's slightly different on how that journey is occurring.
I get the impression working in your teams would be a very enjoyable experience, Jim, both fun and full of empathy and compassion. It's not like that in all organizations, and we read a lot about things like the Great Resignation, and from my conversations with leaders, it's real for a lot of companies. People are leaving, finding different companies that they want to work for, different methods of working that maybe their current company is not amenable to, but now there are hundreds, maybe thousands of other companies that they can go and move to. So where should companies start if they're experiencing maybe mass resignation or minor resignation? Where do you think is the most obvious place to try and dig in an employee experience?
I think you have to listen to employees and what are they saying. And to listen, you need to be present in the conversation. It's another one of those helpful hints as I was retiring to leaders is some people are listening and formulating what they're going to say rather than really listening to what's being said. And it's so important to do that. But listening requires that offering an opportunity for people to engage in a discussion. I think that's front and center. Are you going to see resignations? Yes. The flip side is, we've been able to hire people in all 50 states, now that we're virtual. And for certain positions, you can recruit that way. And we found in info security for certain analytic positions, working in Missouri is just fine. And in fact, there might be advantages to it in terms of hitting different time zones and that. So it's a different kind of recruitment process. And then, we try to be as flexible as possible. Like some people are saying, I'd like to move to another state. You have to be able to handle the taxes from an HR perspective, but where the job allows that, why not allow them to do it? I do think leaders are concerned, how can I make sure that people are achieving the productivity that they should be working remotely? But I don't know that it was much different than when people were on site. If people really didn't want to work on site, they could sit there and do as little as possible, right? So it really is, are they meeting their objectives and the outcomes you expect from them? And I think that's especially true in what I would call the knowledge worker ranks. So, for a programmer, if they work 3 hours during the day and 5 hours in the evening and 1 hour in the middle of the night, that's fine with me. As long as they're getting done what needs to get done. But I think listening and truly listening is where you have to start. But it's becoming a extremely competitive environment, and every company has its limitations and what they can do with benefits, flexibility, and pay. So, those are always going to be constraining factors.
I agree, Jim. I think listening is probably one of the most underrated, or at least underutilized skills in the workplace. And for employees that need recognition and reward, that all starts with being heard. So when you think about where we can take things, what do you think the future of work looks like 5, 6, 7 years from now?
The future of work, I think one is we're going to solve the hybrid work problem. And what do I mean by the hybrid work problem? When you have half the team in a conference room and half working virtually, the technology really isn't there to provide this feel-good, interactive environment. It still feels like there's people in the room and there's people working virtually, and the people in the room are able to interact more easily than the people that are working virtually. So that needs to be solved, and whether it's Teams, whether it's Zoom, or whether it's Slack, or whether it's all three, that needs to be addressed. This whole idea of the overused Amazon experience needs to become a reality when people are interacting with employee activities that aren't core to their job, but that they need to get done. And that's going to differ by each person. For us in healthcare, there's a lot in terms of, from a patient having open scheduling and be able to book an appointment, which actually takes relief off the front desk staff in a practice that are feeling overwhelmed because people are walking in to check in, and then there's people calling on the phone trying to get an appointment. So all that has to be a cleaner experience. There's a video out there somewhere on YouTube is, what if the airline industry worked like healthcare? And it's actually pretty funny. You book your appointment, and then you have to call another company to deal with your luggage, and then it just goes on and on in terms of booking flights, and if that was all fractured. Although I guess the past few days the airline industry is not getting very high marks, but that might be weather related.
So, Jim, you're about to retire. I imagine you're spending a lot of time right now with your existing team or incoming leaders. So what are the big pieces of advice that you would give to either your own leaders or other leaders in a similar position?
First, understand, we talk about people, process, and technology. The technology is actually not that hard, and the processes a little more difficult, but it's the people where you need to focus your effort. And with that comes, those two things I've talked about: respect them and listen to them, followed by communicate to them so that they understand what's going on and understand they're pretty smart. I always say hire smarter people than yourself. That's a really important thing to do. Every leader should plan, I think, on a continuous basis for their own exit. You know, that the old, if you get hit by a bus, things shouldn't collapse. So you really need to build a system based on sort of the entire team and not reliant on a single member of that team. Understanding everyone has different skill sets in that, but that's very important. I think having fun is a really important at work. Now, I mean, you can't go overboard. I think I've been cited a few times in reviews that I have too much fun, but that's neither here nor there. Employees like that type of personal engagement, but you need to be sensitive to each person. There's people that are extroverts and people that are introverts, and what are the boundaries? But you should be able to have an enjoyable work environment, and those are probably the key things. It's nothing about technology. I've always told people everything I've needed to know from a technology perspective I've learned in the last 60 days. So, that's sort of the rule of you have to be a continuous learner in this environment and in this discipline, because things do change that quickly.
Jim, I feel like I could talk to you for hours, and I'm looking forward to reading the book one day. But I'm gonna wrap this up with 3 quick fire questions. Are you ready?
Sure.
So first question, what piece of advice would you give to someone stepping into the CIO role for the first time, maybe early in their career?
Go on a listening tour throughout the organization. In other words, don't do anything radical in the first 3 to 6 months. Figure out, because every organization is unique. So don't come in with your own playbook and execute that playbook. In the end, maybe you do, but go on that listening tour first. And prepare, you have to prepare 3 envelopes. You know that story, right?
Go on.
Well, when you become CIO, like when I became CIO, there was an envelope in my desk from the prior CIO, and he says, when you get there, open it. And so I opened it, and it said, prepare 3 envelopes. And then he says, actually he left 3, and he says, but you have to open them in order. He says, when you get in trouble, open them. So, about 3 to 6 months, get nervous, I open it, and it says, blame your predecessor. And so, okay, well, that seems like that'll work. Then about 1.5 years into it, started getting nervous again. So I grabbed the second envelope, and it says reorganize. So that sounds good. So I'll reorganize, things will be better. And then a few years later, I got nervous. And so I pulled the third envelope, and it said prepare 3 envelopes. So it's a joke.
So have you written your 3 envelopes yet? Are they in the drawer?
Yeah, they're in the drawer. Yeah, exactly.
All right, second question, Jim. What's one tactical thing that every leader can implement tomorrow to go and motivate their employees?
Tactically, I think it's adhering to your SLAs, to your service level agreements, and making sure you're measuring your SLAs, and that you make sure your teams are accountable. Whether that is a repair of a desktop, whether that's delivery of a laptop, whether that's turnaround on a service desk ticket. I mean, it's very tactical, but those are really important to an employee base. Again, it gets back to, when you're a consumer, you have in your head you have an SLA with the company that you're working with, whether it's your car repairman, whether it's Amazon, whomever. And I think in the work environment, often we publish those SLAs. but we don't necessarily continuously measure. And when we drift, how do we bring that back in? So tactically, I think that's really important.
Yeah, I think that all comes down to trust. When we make commitments and we stick to them, it breeds trust. And if we make commitments and we don't stick to them, people start to question our integrity. I think it's a critical one. Okay, last question. One piece of tech that you can't live without in your personal life outside of your smartphone.
Oh God, because that was going to be number one, was my iPhone. I would, I'd say a really good laptop, honestly. You know, I had an iPad for a while. I like the iPad. I may go back to it on occasion, but I like my laptop.
Love it. Well, Jim, thanks for spending time with us today. I'll reiterate what I said at the beginning. Congratulations on a great career and enjoy your retirement. You deserve it.
Well, thank you, and you have a great day.